there's really no such thing as preventing some of these crises we're talking about, but there's risk reduction. And just listening to your show and hearing what the guests are saying, do those things, because there are so many. Some people find it overwhelming, the levels of care, what they cost, all the ways you can save for it, the asset protection with legal planning. People don't have to master all of that, but even better if they can avoid it by taking healthy steps now and at least reducing their risk of it. But if you can't eliminate the risk, at least, hear what an elder law attorney has to say about how you set things up.
Welcome back to the podcast, friends. Good to be with you again. I'm your host, Scott Fulton. I learned early in my research and engineering career, if you want to be successful at something, go out and find what already exists, define what that is really carefully, and then figure out how to reverse engineer it. The likelihood of success is much greater. The path to get there is going to be much more predictable, and you're ultimately going to spend far less energy going off on tangents along the way that inevitably happens in research. And so part of what I try to do with this program and my teaching is to bring people in who understand what later life really looks like. It's not a window that most of us get a look at. And so if we look through the eyes of those who work with older adults, they have a lot to teach us to help us reverse engineer our lives, because they can predict pretty well today what's going to happen tomorrow when they look at certain individuals and family situations. With that prelude, my guest today is Patrick Cawley. Patrick's an elder law attorney and owner of Keystone Elder Law, and I kind of nickname Patrick, he's the ghost of Christmas present and the ghost of Christmas future. He can wear both of those capes, really because he has those insights into what does the future look like based on the choices that you and I are making today. He sees it every day in his work, and so we're going to get some insights into what does that look like. So whether you're kind of planning for your own life, whether you're maybe trying to help manage your parents move forward somehow, or you're just trying to understand their situation, I think in both cases you're going to find some real value here. And also, what's unique, I think, about Patrick is a tremendous commitment to health and understanding the role that the health choices that we make today or don't make, how those tend to play out in the long term. And so if we think about aging, this is somebody who's got a lot of insights to share with us, and I think you're going to really enjoy our conversation. And with that, let's get on with the show. Patrick Cawley, welcome to the Healthspan podcast. Good to have you on the show today.
I love what you're doing with these conversations, and I'm really happy to join you.
So I've known a few elder law attorneys over the years, and have enjoyed them all. But I'm going to suggest that you're a little bit different than what I think most people expect to hear from an elder law attorney. And that's really, I think, the main reason why we're going to talk today is we're going to talk about things that people aren't expecting insights into. And I think at your suggestion, because this is kind of how you and I think, we'll kind of think about this as you're the ghost of Christmas future to give us a look back on the years from today until whenever that day comes. And that for me is like, that's why I like to kind of talk with people who are used to dealing with later life issues, because those are insights that the rest of us just wonder about, but we don't even know who to ask. And so for the audience, you can privately just listen quietly and probably learn a few things that you might have been thinking about or maybe hadn't, and we'll look forward. So I'll start off with saying, so what's the big deal? Why do you worry about health? Because you're supposed to be worried about death, and most of what I hear about you is about health. What's going on?
Well, if we ran with that Charles Dickens analogy, I listen to the conversations you're having on Wealthspan, and it's so helpful. And I find it personally interesting, but I see it from more the future angle, where if you're the ghost of Christmas present and you're saying, let's take a look at your diet, let's take a look at your exercise, you're telling people in the present, there might be things that could be adjusted. I'm seeing the future. I'm seeing where the person in my office, maybe even earlier today, could not lift herself up out of a chair, can't use the bathroom without assistance. And if that's just physical frailty, there's cognitive decline. Of course, I mean, this is the future of an accumulation of years of habits. And the reason I talk to people about this and I share what the vision of the future looks like is because I think too often people hear all of the great conversations you're having and they say, well, if I eat the broccoli instead of the pizza or the Pringles, I might add some days to my life. But then they shrug it off and they say, well, we're all going to die. And they keep doing what they're doing. What I want people to see is that vision of functional independence is lost. Your dignity is really on the line. Your ability to go through your day on your own, that's there. And not to mention, when the whole family is in the elder law attorney's office, it's the whole family is wringing their hands and wondering where's the money going to come from to pay for assisted living or the nursing home. And that's really expensive. And it's common because people aren't paying attention in the present to what to the healthy habits that will accumulate and will have consequences well beyond the number of days of life. It's really what does a good life look like for you? Because I can tell you what it looks like when people accumulate bad habits, and I can tell you it's not just how many days they live, it's their dignity, it's their ability to get through their day, it's their quality of life, it's their emotions and finances of their family members that will suffer from the accumulation of those habits.
You touched on dignity a few times we went through there, and so it's one I use with people, or I also in identity, kind of interchangeably, depending on what the topic is. But as I try to explain to people, the system at large, wherever we think about it in terms of that provides for older adults, is largely designed to strip away what we think of as independence, dignity, identity, because we just need to step in and take over. Well, no matter who that we is, right? And so that's what I try to kind of speak to the same things, I think, around. It's just the way the system works, and you're not going to change the system. Understand that if you don't do some proactive things around that, and there's many things you can do, that's the result. And that's, I think, partly why there's so much anxiety around aging and all the care. It's not, there's the financial piece for sure. We can get into that. But I think that's the others. They just feel like they lose control. And families, like everybody feels like they lose control, I think. Is that fair to say?
But that is a huge part of it is losing control. And there's the buzzword person-centered care. Some do actually do that better than others, where you are looking out for individual background and what are their needs, and you're really catering in a one-on-one way to what a person needs. So you empower the person to have choice and control, but it's really hard to do. And I think this is what you're describing, where if there are 30 residents that have to get out of bed, use the bathroom, get to breakfast, and there aren't a lot of staff to do that, everybody's going to sort of have to fall in line, and the individual needs or desires start to fall by the wayside just to make the whole system work. So that is more the norm.
Yeah, it's and I think maybe we can touch on that a little bit, and I don't, maybe a little bit unfair, but one of them, maybe we can talk a little bit about when we think about the type of housing that's available for older adults. That maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about what the range that you see across your clients, in terms of what works, and maybe more so around what's the planning to do, because that's the piece I look at around what's your plan around housing. It's fine to plan to do some other things, but housing requires a plan in advance. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about what you try to encourage people to think about it when they're looking forward to making some choices, or at least some plans in place.
Well, now I feel like an amateur talking to a professional athlete here. But you're absolutely right. This comes up. And I think people are a little more aware of this aspect where Who knows? Listeners could be in a very urban environment. They could be out in a very rural environment. A lot of my clients are in sort of a suburban setting where there's already a shortage of housing for the number of people who want to live in the area. And there are definitely aging demographics where people they're starting to think, do I want to keep doing stairs when I'm 85 or 90? Will I be able to get through doorways in this house if I'm in a wheelchair? There's no first floor bedroom or bathroom. So am I setting up my living space in the living room? They're starting to think that, and then they think, well, I'll find a place that has all of those features, and it doesn't exist, or at least not in any quantity close to the need that is out there. So there's a lot of people who are thinking, I'd love to sell my current house and plan to age in place because, again, this is talk about something that's tied up in your identity and your dignity. It's your home. It's where you have the most control, I suppose. And there just is no way to sell the place they have and at any affordable price find what is really a rare commodity, which is that aging in place environment, short of going to a retirement community, which is then becomes a more popular option, I suppose. But living in your own home, that can be challenging depending on the urban, rural, or suburban environment that you live in.
Yeah, and the later you leave it, it doesn't get easier, right? Like the notion of doing upgrades won't get easier in 5 years. That the idea of moving and won't get easier in 5 years. And so the usual plan I hear people is, well, we're going to keep doing what we're doing here for as long as we can, which I always come back with, and then what? Like, so then you've given up, and you're just going to take what's left over, because I can tell you what's left over is the leftovers. None of them typically would have been your first choice. I'll maybe add on the aging in place conversation that you raised up. In the clients, when I was doing this more actively, I still consult with clients on the front end on the concept piece of what can you do with your current home? Does it make sense to stay? Should you move? Those sort of questions would be the clients where we did work for them in their home and they were unsure about the investment. The one thing that when I told them, essentially what you just talked about, was the resale value of a home that's already set up to age in place. Like that's today's buyer, right? We still think it's the young family. Now today's buyer, you're in a nice neighborhood and you have a home that someone, an older family could move into right away. That has high market value. I've seen that over and over again, because that's what we know in this space, but that's not what the general buyer is. They're all still these kind of modern myths just continue. We assume that everyone wants the big grand home and the big foyer, and there's a strong market for people to say, I can just move in. It's turnkey ready, right? So if you make your home turnkey ready, it works for you. And when the family comes to, if you need to move on, at that point, you've probably been involved in this too, where they need to sell the home. Selling that home now becomes a much easier task than the alternative where we just hung on. They had an idea the home was worth whatever number, but suddenly now it hasn't been maintained. The market value is decreased, and the money you thought you had available for living in a senior community, a good chunk of that is gone now. And they just kind of forget the living in the moment and just hanging on. The price of that long term is really high.
I agree. I see this happen all the time. So making modifications sooner rather than later might make it more likely that you stay in a place where you have control and you maintain your independence and your dignity. It definitely makes your home into the gem that more people are looking for and will continue to look for. And I don't see why it would have any downside, in the sense that even the younger family, if that is the buyer, okay, they don't mind having a first floor master either, or a bathroom
Exactly.
downstairs. So it works for really across the ages. But keeping up with trends of what younger buyers are looking for in real estate is not really my skill set, but I can see that the older people they are absolutely hoping for that to emerge as an option. And outside of so-called 55 plus communities, it's just harder to find. And those have their own limitations, I suppose. If you need a higher level of care, that's not part of it. You live in an exclusive neighborhood based on age. And sure, it's great to be around other peers. But even some of them that I've seen have multiple stories. They might be townhomes, which they're beautiful, but you're not necessarily escaping some of the limitations that we've been describing. But ultimately, and I'm sure this is an extension of what you have spent far more time thinking about than it's about who are your neighbors too, because there is a phenomenon of people, on the same block, just staying in the same home for a long time. Well, that's part of your support structure. Somebody to check in on you, someone to help you get the mail, someone to notify family members if suddenly you need an extra level of support. So that too is part of the housing situation where there's something to be said for even if the home is not ideally set up, at least do you have neighbors you've grown into relationships with of trust and you look out for each other? That can be valuable as well.
Yeah, for sure. So let's shift gears a little bit, and maybe we can talk about the dynamic of between older adults and adult children. Um, Most adult children, at some point, or many, will find themselves having to manage decisions on behalf of their parents. Um, and then, even in advance of that, one of the questions I get a lot is, I really think my parents need to be doing something, but I can't get them to do anything. Whatever that is, whether it's care into the home, whether it's upgrades in the home, or think they need to move into a senior living community. Um, Maybe you can kind of give me a sense of what's been your experience in sitting in, I'm sure, on many of those conversations in that dynamic of the adult child kind of frustrated, not knowing how to get anywhere, or in the parent. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier around parents. In my experience, typically the older adult parent is in a defensive mode from the starting point because they've seen this pattern. They knew it was coming, right? Conscious or not, that everyone's going to try to take things away from them as they get older. So start with, fighting against anyone who wants to make a change. So maybe you can kind of give us some insights into what that dynamic looks like. You've probably seen all sides of it. I'm guessing that would be, I think, helpful insights for people to get a better flavor of the different ways that that can go for people.
It is a topic about which so much can be said. But let's start with the most foundational recognition that yes, if you have adult children, there is a high likelihood that they will be called upon to pay your bills, sign your tax return for you, make medical decisions for you. There's all kinds of roles in supporting an aging parent. And my first question would be, do they have the legal authority to do it? And this is what people skip over. They don't stop to think the most important part of planning is sometimes having an incapacity plan. It's having a power of attorney. It's having an advance directive or a healthcare power of attorney, because you have to actually legally authorize someone to be able to call the bank, or else the bank is not going to talk to them on your behalf about your money, even spouses for that matter. So that's the first step. But then I tell people, I can write a great power of attorney. I can give all kinds of authority and it'll help the adult child to get into bank accounts, to pay the bills, to deal with the insurance company, to sign agreements, or if they have to sell the car, they'll sign the title for you. It's seamless in capacity planning, but we'll get that all finished. And then a few years go by, and the adult child shows up in my office and says, dad had a stroke, mom has dementia, whatever the case may be. And I say, well, okay, I'm sorry to hear that that's going on. We did plan for this, though. Let me walk you through the power of attorney. So that's assuming they even took the step that so many people do not do, which is estate planning. But let's say we have the legal authority. I go through all of this. You have this great authority, adult child. The child stares at me blankly and says, I have no idea where mom and dad have money. I have no idea what banks they use, what insurance companies they've worked with. I don't know what bills they have to pay. In fact, I checked the mailbox and there was nothing there because I think they're getting their bills by email and I don't know the passwords. So multiple levels of basic preparation that aging ideally would come with, which is number one, empower them, give them the legal authority to step up. Number two, write some sort of instruction manual for your life to tell them these are the accounts we have, this is the land we own, these are the insurance companies, these are the recurring bills. Have a running list. Passwords, that's tricky. You have to, there's a couple different ways you can do that, but at least empower them legally and then give them the roadmap to do it. But then finally, we're getting into what you raised, which is the interpersonal problem where, yes, you want to avoid if you're the adult child, you want to avoid the tendency to parent the parent. They're not children and you should not infantilize them. And in fact, that I think you're right. That is their greatest fear is that they're already losing control over enough. They're losing their friends. They're losing their mobility. They're losing things and they want to cling to whatever authority over their life, whatever agency they still have. And they don't want to be told by their child, of all people, what they can and can't do. So it's a delicate approach. A psychologist named Barry Jacobs out of Philadelphia writes a lot about this for AARP. He's just so poignantly about
There's
this
a name from the
dynamic.
past I haven't heard for a while. I'd forgotten him. I connected with him a number of years ago. Yeah.
He's fantastic, and I read everything he writes because, again, a little. I mean, we all sort of connect our areas of expertise to serve the same people, and I read everything he writes because he's been down that road personally, but this is sort of his area of expertise is speaking to families about this caregiving dynamic. But so much of it is being respectful and empathetic. But let's assume that the adult child has a legitimate concern. The parent is really a danger to himself or herself because they really are not safe where they live. That's one thing. And how you would approach that conversation to earn trust might be baby steps. It might be, don't do this for me, Dad. That we're bringing in a home care aide to help you through the day. Don't do this for yourself. In other words, this isn't really because you can't do it. It's to help me because I have so many responsibilities with my job. I have responsibilities with my family. I think starting it down the road that this doesn't have to be so terrible. But again, getting into the expertise of Dr. Barry Jacobs, he's the better source of that. But it's very much a topic that so much can be said about.
Yeah, so another question I get often, which I think I'll kind of just drill into a little bit that you touched on was in terms of the safety, in terms of how we view the risk of safety. So we can look at maybe the same individual in the exact same level of concern. One lives in their home independently that they've been for many years. The other lives in an apartment building surrounded by neighbors, right? So in terms of so I asked the question, so what's the consequence of event? And in one case, the house burns to the ground and perhaps the parent or parents pass as a result of the fire. It's tragic, but no one else has been impacted as a result. Take that same, whatever triggered that fire and it's now an apartment building, you have 100 families now put at risk, right? So from an outsider or the adult child looking at it, those clearly, the first scenario would be really difficult, and lots see that, very difficult. But the second scenario is you must act earlier, right? And so what would be the course of action for kind of what would you advise the adult child in that second circumstance? Well, you could talk about both in terms of how do you approach that, and what would be the options that you would suggest to them?
I would suggest that very seldom do people think through those large scale consequences in housing. That exact line of thinking that you just shared comes up far more often in the context of driving. So let's set it. I mean, if there's cognitive
Sure.
decline, that has its own set of dangers and predictable consequences. But anybody's vision starts to suffer the older they get, their reaction time, their ability to bring their attention back to focus after getting distracted by noises and so forth. So the driving conversation is where this typically happens. And I tell people there's a care approach and there's a legal approach to a lot of these issues. The legal approach is usually not the first option because it's very heavy-handed. So, literally taking over mom or dad's life and saying, no, it's not safe for you to drive. It's not safe for you to live in this home might involve guardianship or conservatorship, as it's called in some states, where you're presenting evidence of these consequences to a judge and you're saying, Judge, put me in charge, strip the parent of all of their rights. That's very heavy-handed. In the context of driving, it could simply be getting a letter from the doctor to the state Department of Motor Vehicles, and the driver's license gets yanked, and then the parent can't drive. But you go to that. That's really when the safety issue can no longer be ignored, and you've run out of other options. But when I work with adult child caregivers for a parent with dementia, and I go beyond the legal, I actually coach them on care skills that I spent a lot of time learning, and I seem to learn more all the time. It's all about maintain the relationship first, earn trust, show them that you don't have to worry about this. You maintained this home for so long, but don't you start to show that you are someone who is there to look out for their best interests before you start trying to alter their situation, because when the alteration happens, they need to already know, well, you've got all this figured out. This is not making a lot of sense to me, but you've earned the trust. So I really encourage people to go a route of trust building first before the heavy-handed legal solutions, whether it's taking a driver's license or getting guardianship or conservatorship to take over their life. This comes up in a lot of contexts. The people who are careless with their money. There's people coming to the door to sell them things they don't need, and they're getting manipulated. They're getting scammed, and the children tend to have this instinctive protective urge to come in and take over and say, "You're not doing it right, mom or dad. I know how to do it." That okay, but you're going to have a heavy-handed approach, and that's going to have consequences for the relationship, and you might win the battle but lose the war. So there's all kinds of scenarios that we could talk about where there's a heavy-handed legal approach, and there's probably a better care approach involving maintaining the relationship and the trust.
Yeah, as you're talking about, the way I talk to people about it is you want to develop a partnership where you feel like you're both supporting one another for some common cause. But of course, I think exactly your point is you need to start that much earlier than before the need or before the crisis or before some big decision. This notion of, which I think that's what we see in so many topics around aging, is it's uncomfortable, so we'll defer. We defer. We get very practiced at deferring, and so we miss the opportunity to really develop that relationship between older adults and older parents in a new setting that's actually one where they feel like they've got each other's back. Because a lot of times, right, the older adults, they tend not to share, one, because we talked about in terms of independence and in their identity, but also that they don't want to be a burden. And
Yes.
by feeling like they don't want to be a burden, they don't share any information
Right.
until they,
Which is exactly the wrong way to go about it.
right, until
And
the bank account's empty and they can't write a check or something happen, right? That
right.
they got scammed for something and they hope no one would find out. Well,
Sure.
right. So the money suddenly ran out, and it's so much harder after the fact. I mean, it's always harder after the fact, but add a few months after the fact, and it becomes that much more difficult. So, yeah, it's I think the idea that I try to convey when I talk to more of the older adults is you just can't accept no as like, if it's not working, try a different way. Timing is everything and both sides, right? I've had where the adult children don't want to with talk about it with their parents. And reality is there's never going to be a great time, but keep working at it. And I think it's the questions you probably suggest around how can I support you best going forward? Like what would be the things that you're worrying about? We're talking about functional families. I suspect when we have dysfunctional families, everything is going to be that much harder and probably much more difficult to make progress on any of these.
It is. In the functional family, too, I guess I should add that I'm sensitive to the perspective of the adult child who knows maybe that I ought to at least know what banks mom or dad use. I ought to know what I would need to know to step up and support them, but they feel hesitant to start that conversation. And they'll say to me, I don't want to make it sound like I'm after their money. I don't care if I get an inheritance at all. I just want to help them.
Right.
But they fear that it will sound that they're after the money and not the parent's best interest. So that's for their part. That's part of the reluctance to have the conversation. And the parents we've covered, it's maybe not wanting to be a burden, not wanting to lose control. Those are different concepts. But I think being a burden is you didn't equip or empower the child to step up to do all of the things, and ignoring the high likelihood of needing their support is not going to work out well. It'll be so much more of a burden. And when it comes to the dysfunctional families, and that comes in a lot of flavors. Some are more obvious than others. Sometimes everybody gets along well enough, the siblings will say, until there's this anticipatory grieving because mom or dad's health is declining. There's money issues coming up. If there's one local child who's doing all this work, maybe the parent is paying them. Okay, then that engenders all kinds of resentment from the faraway child who might also have a sense of guilt about not being local enough to help. So, and then it's just, it adds fuel to the fire that was there before. Any rift in the relationship will just become much worse. And so group communication becomes very important. And that's not always possible because there are some who just aren't on board with what everybody else is on board with. And there's no better way to get through that than communication and do your best to bring people to at least an understanding of what's going on for the older adult.
Yeah, and an understanding it's going to take time, right? Because it's a topic we are practiced at avoiding. So expecting someone to jump on and be up to speed, in an email, and it's all go forward from here, not likely to work out quite so well. All those things go back to childhood. Any number of things just kind of haunt people. So let's go back a little bit and kind of go back to where we started around the health piece in terms of investing in health. It's a place where you and I clearly have a lot in common, and we approach it from different angles, clearly with the same objective in mind. If we could advise people today, kind of going forward, that look forward to say the client who was really health conscious, not that there's a guarantee that it all works out perfect, but you are probably seeing this up close and personal more than in your work than the rest of us. And so that question of, is it really worth it? Like, Patrick, is it really worth kind of, they talk about that I should be going for walks every day and, I should be, but, life is short and I only have so much time left. And, I'm in my 60s now. I don't know how much time I'm going to have left. Is it really, I don't think it really matters for me anymore. This is the self-talk that I think, I hear people having it out loud too. What do you see in terms of for those who kind of double? Because I see some who double down. Like I see age 50 is really pivotal because that's often about the age that the adult children are now seeing the parents starting to go downhill nominally. Depends obviously on what age they had the kids and things. But What advice would you give to those adults today saying you're writing your own future in many respects, at least the odds of your future are going to be dictated by the patterns you establish today?
Well, my advice would be it's not just about you. So, and I think that's where the self-talk stops. It's about how much time do I have? And I would paint the picture of, and this is starting to hit the headlines more, and you can expect to see it more in the future, of the number of people who are adults. You use 50. That's how old I am. So, and I'm a family caregiver, so I also see this, at home. It's the number of people who have to leave the workforce, threatening their present ability to pay their bills, their future retirement savings, because there's an aging parent who needs their help. And not everybody can afford to do that, so they go part-time. They pass up promotions. In the process, they're giving up on developing their skills. So they're not keeping up even when they are there or can come back to the workforce. So when I say it's not just about you, it's what is the impact? What's the ripple effect on the people you care about? And you might say, I don't want to be a burden on my kids, but I'm not going to go for that walk, and I'm not going to dial in my diet. Even though there's abundant evidence that it's never too late to do that, you can continue to see improvements in your present well-being and your future well-being. When people choose not to do it, I'm sure they're not thinking about the impact of the children who are now stressed about staying employed, staying, their own marriage, because they're constantly running off to care for the parent, their financial security. How are they going to make their own kids at whatever age? That there's such a downstream effect. And there, in the last article I read about this, just in the last month or so, it's something like trillions of dollars in wages lost because of caring for an aging parent. And from the impact on the employers, billions of dollars lost just because they don't have people there because they're caring for aging parents. And this is a trend that will only intensify over the next 20 to 30 years, according to everybody looking at it. And what does that have? What impact does that have on our national economy? You can continue to look at it from that perspective. That's the cumulative effect of talking yourself into not going for the walk or following the diet that, there's abundant evidence it will add to years to your health span and your lifespan. That's what I see. And I see the conference room full of the adult children wringing their hands about where's the money going to come from for the assisted living or the nursing home. I see the people who, mom or dad not only didn't go for the walk multiple times and now has the consequences, but never did the basic planning to have a power of attorney and set the children up to as at least a safety net. They just, and they don't have any idea. There's been none of the communications we've been talking about. I just think that when people are in that present moment talking themselves out of good habits that become easier the longer you do them, it just becomes who you are. They're signing up for a future that is not only bleak for them, it's bleak for their whole family, it's bleak for for their children's employers, for the national economy. It just keeps going.
Yeah, so I do work with leadership teams, and one of the things I really try to stress with them is really to this point of, and particularly the women who are impacted by it. Right? They're at a point of really just coming up to the peak of their career. Many will say they feel they've had to work harder, sacrifice more in the workplace to get to where they got to, and suddenly now they find themselves feeling the obligation. It's a choice. Typically, they're making a conscious choice to now have to go take care of an aging parent, and really missing the cycle. Yeah, and it's really unfortunate when it happens, but it happens so often, as you say. It's happening more. Let me switch gears a little bit because you've raised it a few times, but that wringing hands around cost, it's a place that again, that people avoid in terms of understanding what is the cost of aging in America today, as soon as you need outside help. Right? And outside help can come in the form of of healthcare in terms of home care workers coming into the home. It can come in the form of family members getting paid as well. But also particularly when you start to move into senior living communities, whether that's independent living, assisted living, and nursing. And maybe we touch on each of those. And I may throw in a question or two as we go through. But if you can maybe speak to the relative magnitude, obviously it changes where people are located, but how they might go about kind of getting some gauge around what they should be thinking about, or how would they go about finding out what their situation should be from a planning standpoint.
Well, I think you've already touched on something important right in the question, which is you mentioned different levels of care, because I guarantee you most people think there's this monolith called the home and it's all one thing, but it's far from it. There are options to stay in your residence, which is where everybody wants to stay. But okay, if you need help getting out of bed and getting bathed and getting dressed and having meals prepared, reminders to take medications, transportation to doctor's offices, who's doing that? So are we back to the adult child who has to leave work, maybe engendering the resentment of why aren't my siblings helping, and the next generation fallout from that? Some will be there to do that and others can't. And so then there's professional home care that the cost will vary across the country. Where I am in Pennsylvania, $25 to $30 an hour now, and a home care person will get you through your day, at least until your friends or your family can be there. But if we're going up a level of care, there might be assisted living. In my state, it's more commonly called personal care communities, and it's running anywhere from $6,000 to $9,000 a month. A home-like environment, but not your home, of course, but it doesn't feel like you're living in a hospital and you're around other people, which has its own medicinal quality. There are activities to keep you engaged, and you're not, there are people working in shifts if in case you're a fall risk. So but the nursing home is the big one. I mean, that's an intensive level of care. If you've had a stroke, you will have occupational and speech therapists. You will have physical therapists. There are registered nurses. And so licensed professionals, intensive level of care, it's very expensive. And so I've heard attorneys across the country talking about 10,000 a month. Where I am, it's more like 13 to $16,000 every single month. And if people are planning for that, once they understand levels of care, and about a 70% likelihood is usually what you hear of needing one of those levels or one or more of those levels of care. That's common enough and expensive enough that you would think people are planning for it. But there's only so many ways to plan for it and pay for it. One is you are working with a financial advisor, or on your own, you're building savings that will be essentially earmarked to write checks for that amount of money. And what does that do to your healthy spouse who might go into poverty if you haven't saved enough? And the escalating costs of long-term care in this country have outpaced inflation. So I couldn't even tell you in 5, 10 years what it's going to cost. It's just going to be more. So if it's not privately paying by writing checks, well, maybe you have long-term care insurance where I'm not going to use my income or my savings. That's for my family. I'm certainly not going to threaten the ability of my adult child to work and save for their own future. I'm using the insurance company's money. So again, that's something you do long before you need it. I mean, most of those policies are sold 20 to 30 years before they're actually used. But finally, there's the Medicaid program, which is a federal program, but it's administered by the states. Every state has their own rules, but you're going to turn over your income most likely to the nursing home. Medicaid will pay the rest of the bill with variations state to state. You're going to have to be broke. Now, of course, you can accelerate going broke on paper and keep money in the family. Don't do this yourself. Get an elder law attorney to guide you through it. But you're going to lose control there. I mean, you're losing income, you're losing access to money. And then finally, they penalize gifting if you don't do that the right way. So if you've been helping out the grandkids, if you've been helping out your adult children, that could backfire on you. So knowing the levels of care, knowing how you're going to pay for it, and specifically, if you don't have endless cash and you don't have long-term care insurance, really having a sense of how the Medicaid rules work in your state so that you can set things up in a way that that will go more smoothly for your family. But that's people find this mystifying, and it doesn't make a lot of sense that this is our system. But those are your options. Veterans have a smaller subset of some benefits that could help, but even there, it's a subset. It's those who served in active duty during certain defined wartime periods. So that's not even as widely available as it probably should be. But if there's people out there thinking, well, I have Medicare, I'll be fine. That doesn't pay for really anything in long-term care. So giving a little more thought to the levels of care and how you will pay for it long before you need it is really the only way for this to go smoothly for the family.
Yeah, so just to underline what you said there, Medicare does not pay for for any senior living community, like assisted living or any
No.
of those, right?
No,
There's
so I mean, this is just one of these quirks where listeners today might think ahead 10 or 15 or 20 years. And if they're in decent health now, they don't know. In 15 years, will I have heart disease? Will I have to go in for some big procedure, heart stent procedure, or some sort of surgery? Will I have cancer? Will I need, chemo, radiation, lots of follow-up visits? Well, if that's the way it goes, Medicare, if that's what your health insurance is, which it is for most people after 65, that's for your acute care. That is all acute care. So the lion's share of that expensive treatment will be covered by Medicare. But what if you have the nerve to have dementia? What if you have the nerve to have a stroke, or you have a bad fall and you lose your mobility because your hip and your femur are broken, or you get into a car accident? So if you need long-term nursing and support, Medicare won't pay for any of that. I mean, you might get some durable medical equipment like a wheelchair, but they are in home health are the licensed professionals who will come in maybe a day or two a week, but not get you through your day. They're just administering the medications, the IVs, the wound care, but they're not getting you through your day. That's one of the other three options, including Medicaid.
Yeah, and on the Medicaid, I think a really important number in terms of for Medicaid, in terms of we're talking about a window of years. So maybe you can kind of maybe start with the look back period just to give people a context of why planning is so helpful, regardless of which way you're going to go. And if you want to benefit from those programs, how should you approach it and what the time frame would be?
Sure. So for people who do not have the endless cash, they don't have a very robust long-term care insurance policy. So you ought to at least know something about how Medicaid is the social safety net for the middle class when it comes to long-term care. And I'll tell you, in four states, including the one that I'm in, Medicaid will really only help the most at a nursing home level. So they don't even pay for assisted living. Now, most states do. And then you need to know the rules. So you ask about the look back period. Well, if you go on Medicaid to pay for long-term care, they're going to have your income be a factor. They're going to look at your savings, and you essentially have to get all the money out of your name. But the look back period is the gifting rule, where in every state except California, which has done away with the asset test, making you go broke, they've done away with the gifting rule. Every other state, they look back 5 years. So they want to know, looking, and you have no idea. I mean, this is a conference room table with stacks of paper. We have done 1,800-page Medicaid applications more than a couple times because it's 5 years of statements from every place you've had money. It's 5 years of tax records because they're looking for any month where you gave away over a very small amount of money for anything. If you were helping your kids with their rent or their mortgage, if you were, I don't know, anything other, we can make some exceptions, charitable giving, and helping a child with a disability. We can overcome that, but really it's a pretty strict rule where if you're giving property away, you've now made yourself ineligible for some period of time because they don't want people offloading all their money and then turning to the government for help. So how do you plan for that? Because nobody knows. Are we in the 5 year period right now? I could be in a car accident next week. So you don't know for sure, but you make an educated guess because one, I want to be a little mindful of the gifting. There's more asset protection available if you start using legal tools like trusts, which are designed around these rules, where you can put real estate into a trust and then you don't have to go broke because that's not in your name. So these are tools that elder law attorneys use. So that's some of the planning ahead. Is just being understanding of how the rules work and then looking at your individual circumstances and coming up with a strategy.
And maybe as I think about how to describe an elder law or an elder law attorney, of all the attorneys you're likely to have over the course of your lifetime, the one attorney who's going to help you from a planning perspective and do the most life planning with you is an elder law attorney, right? And we would think of as the basic just being a will, right? As the kind of the one document everyone would, not that everyone has one, but the one document they would associate with. It's an elder law attorney who's typically doing that with you, right? Because they understand what that means as a process of how this gets executed, at the time you pass. But it is such a small part, I think, of really the work that you do, right? And hopefully that's coming through. But maybe you can just speak to that a little bit more around. So if you step back and say, as an elder law attorney, what do you feel kind of your most important value that you bring to clients who come in to see you?
Well, elder law really comes at three stages of life where everybody's healthy and we are preparing an estate plan for the future and being mindful of foreseeable challenges and really asking questions like you've been asking about what is the plan for this? Have you thought through this? Then, when crisis strikes and we need to navigate long-term care options, we need to figure out how it's going to be paid for. Maybe that involves shifting assets around for Medicaid eligibility. That just depends on the person's finances and sometimes longevity. That comes up. And then when the person has passed away, it's administering the estate. Every state has a process for doing that. Probate is a big part of that. But going back to the initial part, helping with the planning. I think you brought up the will. I think most people, their mind, when they hear estate planning, it goes to the will. And that's because I think we are all hardwired to want to help our children, to help the next generation, to leave something that to show for my savings on while I was on earth, this is what I did, and now it's going to impact people even when I'm gone. It just does nothing for you while you're alive. So I don't mean to downplay it. It is part of the plan, but people look at the will to the exclusion of their incapacity plan. How do we get through a period where you're alive, but you need support? So that's part of it. And even if it's the will, even if it's only, I just want to leave something to someone, okay, but that's partly legal and it's partly financial, your beneficiary designations. Now let's look at your family. Elder law attorneys are very holistic. We're going to look at, tell me about the family. If you left the house to your son, is he going to be able to cover the property taxes and the utilities? What about the tax on your estate just to get the house? Can he cover that? Or where's that coming from? Is that somewhere else in your estate? So we're really helping them think about who are all the people, what do you own and how do you own it? That will drive the plan. And then are we anticipating likely challenges like physical frailty or cognitive decline? And then that all comes together as a plan. And then hopefully people have a relationship where they can call that elder law attorney when circumstances change. This person, gosh, how many times have I gotten the call where 6 months ago we had a plan, but then the granddaughter who was supposed to receive the farm died in a skiing accident, or the son who was supposed to be the power of attorney got into a car accident with a head injury and he's not quite himself anymore. So you make adjustments, but that's what the attorney is there for, is to guide you through this so your holistic plan continues to make sense.
Yeah, as you're talking there, I'm thinking of we talk about planning and everyone's happy when they get a plan. I call that plan A, and then and they want to talk to me about it. I said, I'm not that interested in plan A because plan A is everything's going to plan, and it's relatively simple. But the reality is very few things actually go to plan because we have this pattern of that parents die before the children, like all these natural things that for good reason we expect it, but so often it doesn't play out that way. And I think that's why it's so important, and the value that working with an elder law attorney will look at these things and we'll just do, well, what if? Right. So let's take that scenario out. And that kind of goes to where we're trying to talk about all of this. It's again with the adult children and the parents is the, well, what if? What would you like if this? And you get into, once you get the conversation going, it does become a partnership because as an adult child, I'm now starting to understand what are your values, right? What's important to you? Because I can tell you that there's no adult child I've met who can get inside the head of a parent who's 30 years older than they are, who grew up in different times and has different values, even though they grew up in the kids thought they inherited all their values from their parents. And then they come later in life and realize, I don't understand why they're making those choices. That just doesn't seem right. They must be going crazy. No, they just have things change when you get to certain ages in life that it's hard to explain to your children, or at that age, like you're in the business, but we'll say another 50-year-old. How many 50-year-olds truly understand what it's like to be in the mind and the body of a 90-year-old? It's really difficult. So
Right.
don't expect yourself to be there, and don't burden yourself with it, right?
I mean, to emphasize that point, there are people out there coming up with VR, virtual reality headsets to give people a sense of what it's like to have the vision of a 90-year-old or to have the Lewy body dementia of somebody. So just because it's so jarring to get even that glimpse of what it's like to be in that person's shoes. But it's so difficult. And as you said, they grew up in a different time. They had a different model of what it's like to grow old. We are, even if we learned everything from our parents, we go off to school, we meet other people, we start to develop other models of our own. So invariably, there's not always going to be 100% easy empathy, and relationships change when mom and dad have their children, and then dad dies and mom eventually wants to remarry. That might be a tectonic shift in the family dynamic where at least one adult child is now, well, I want property I've never wanted before because I don't want that new guy, the new dad,
Right,
to
right.
get it. I mean, it just brings in all kinds of dynamics. And then there are legal strategies, there's financial strategies, but plan A is long gone at that point.
Yeah, yeah. The maybe the last area we can touch on is I'm not sure what you call the document, but it's it in terms of writing down whether it's an ethical will or the non-legal document that really says this is what I would like to happen in later life, that um, and what's the purpose of going through an exercise of kind of the part that you would I think in contract law where we would call it like a term sheet. It's not legal, but at the same time we're listing it out as these are the things, this is why we're doing it, this is why we have this is what we value, this is what you value, and this is why we're kind of coming together on an agreement of things. But maybe kind of play out, if you would, the value of right, and what do you call that document?
Um, I might have names for it that aren't what you're looking for. I mean, I think it has a role. I'm glad you couched it in terms of something that really has no enforceable effect, unlike other pieces that you want to have an enforceable effect. But a letter of instruction, I've heard it called. I've heard it called an ethical will, where you're giving a sense. I think what's most important from the standpoint of the older adult to communicate to the rest of the family is what does a good life look like, first of all, and who knows, you don't always know the how of how you're going to get there, but that's your North Star. That's the whole point of writing this down. So I've talked about an instruction manual. That's more the nuts and bolts of where's my money? What do I own? How do I own it? Passwords, things like that. But what you're talking about is more of these are my values. And I think where that has the most impact on a family, where it can really be a lifesaver, is in the context of medical decisions. because you can just simply have a healthcare power of attorney where you say this person will say yes or no to a treatment when I can no longer speak for myself. But there's so much that goes on there where, a doctor I spoke to very recently said, talks about it in terms of tipping points, where when do you stop doing the life prolonging treatment? Where do you even maybe stop medications that could lead to a buildup of cholesterol, a stroke, or something like that? Where do you stop doing even the maintenance with the goal of prolonging life? Well, it all comes down to what is quality of life for that individual. And there's no way to know that, especially given what we were just talking about with maybe the disconnect of what it's like to be the parent without some sort of writing. I think it's even better to have an actual conversation, but putting it in writing is very important just to let them know if this starts to change in my life, that we've reached a tipping point. And now you know to exercise the legal authority to say no to a treatment to prolong my life, where I would much rather you uh, manage pain, palliative care, hospice care, and you can go that route instead. And the value of it is not only to honor the parents' wishes, but I can't tell you how many adult children I've talked to who 7 years after they lost mom are still second guessing themselves over how they managed that end stage. Did I get it right? Did I keep mom around too long for selfish reasons and cause her pain? Did I cut her life short? Should I have tried something else? Really, with the North Star in the form of the ethical will or the letter of instruction, it really can go by different names, giving a sense of what's important. What does a good life look like? That's going to guide that child and give the adult child more confidence in their decision making.
Yeah. You touch on something there. Like it's after you're gone, right? The residual effect of doubt and guilt that no one can predict, right? And I think addressing that, like of things that when I think about what do you want to risk burdening your kids with or your grandchildren with, those are not the things you don't want them going through. We focus on the money and things, but I think there's these other elements of what were those last weeks and months of their life like. Again, even though you may not have feel like you'd want to make that choice, once you know that no, this is clearly what they want. That's what they're asking you to do, not to impose your will on them, right? Is to respect your parents' will, and I think that's really helpful for people. And again, it goes back to where we really started all this around the value of really developing the conversation and developing the relationship. I think it comes back to doubling down or investing in our own health while we can, right? Because I think that's really what we're trying to do in this conversation, is to say you are where you are today, whatever that is. Your dynamic is its own. You have a future in front of you. What do you want that to look like? And it's going to have all sorts of variables coming at you that we can't predict. No one can predict. But at the same time, there are many things that are quite common that once you get familiar with, you have opportunities to do essentially scenario planning, which that's really what we're talking about. Well, what if my spouse passes unexpectedly, gets hit by a car, right, has a heart attack and dies. Those to me, without exception, have been bonding discussions. They tend to bring people together. They may be difficult, but I have seen so many bridges kind of made over these sort of things. Because now we're working on something for the future. We're creating something versus we're talking about the past and whatever, whatever our various interpretations of it were. So maybe you kind of give us some final thoughts for whether you're feeling like you're the parent who needs to get busy and get caught up, or you're the adult child who's wondering the what next. I want to be ready for the what next, and how should I think about preparing myself, and what would be some steps and actions to take forward?
Well, I would say one step is Elder law attorneys not only tend to be holistic, but we tend to do a lot of education for free. So you're in whatever state you're listening to this show on, I'm willing to bet there's an elder law attorney that does webinars or offers seminars. Go and hear what they have to say because they will break out how all of these variables work. So, I think, Scott, you would probably agree. I think you've kind of suggested as much that there's really no such thing as preventing some of these crises we're talking about, but there's risk reduction. And just listening to your show and hearing what the guests are saying, do those things because there are so many. Some people find it overwhelming, the levels of care, what they cost, all the ways you can save for it, the asset protection with legal planning. People don't have to master all of that, but even better if they can avoid it by taking healthy steps now and at least reducing their risk of it. But if you can't eliminate the risk, at least, hear what an elder law attorney has to say in your state about how you set things up. A financial advisor can be wonderful, but elder law attorneys tend to be hubs where when something crosses over into financial, for example, the husband passes away, leaving a wife who never managed the money, or vice versa. It's never one gender role, but one handled the money, the other didn't, and is now clueless when the spouse dies. We're connecting them with financial professionals. We're care managers who can bring in, all handle the doctor's appointments and everything. There's a world of resources out there. If you try to just consume it all at once, it would be too overwhelming. But elder law attorneys are pretty good. Financial advisors are pretty good about giving you the scenarios in the future and little steps you can be taking right now. And some of it's just foundational, like having a basic estate plan that anticipates these things. So I think getting education along those lines can then help you to the next step before you try to take the next step, and more will be revealed along the way.
Yeah, and in my experience, this is of places we spend money. This is one of the better value places to spend a relatively small amount of money to get a tremendous peace of mind, but also a lot of practical documents that are going to help out later. So if money is the thing people are worried about, I would say, ask some questions, and you might be surprised that it's not going to be nearly as painful as you thought. You mentioned about webinars. You do webinar, I think, right?
I do. I offer them once a week. It's mainly driven by my state's law. And I know that there are colleagues of mine across the country doing them in their states, which, is great because now especially when you get into Medicaid and it's very state law driven, estate planning is very state law driven. So it's about finding those in the state where people are. But at my site, keystoneelderlaw.com, there's a workshops tab. So for people in Pennsylvania who want to understand how these things work, I go through it once a week. And I meet with people remotely for dementia care coaching to take them through usually about an 8-week course where they need coaching. They just need to know beyond the legal, we got the foundation done. How do we deal with the day to day? Mom asking repetitive questions, doing things that make no sense. We just feel at our wits' end. So there are resources out there, and I hope to be contributing at least on a local level, or if not broader, with dementia coaching.
Yeah, and actually, I'll make one last point, which you raised up, which I'd forgot about, was in terms of people's plan, in terms of where do you want to live out the last years of your life. What state you're in matters, right? In terms of how you view, what you would like the later parts of life to look like. So spending time now to understand what's the upside and downside of the state that you're in, and what are the options around, and that may drive this decision around, are you in the right location, or should you be thinking about that part of your plan to move someplace that supports your values in terms of in later life. So Patrick, I just always enjoy this conversation more than I think I probably should, but it's just, I think it is so rich in content for people. And this is all low stress stuff when you approach it early. It really, because I think what you're presenting for people is options. That's the one thing I try to tell people. The later you leave, the fewer options that are going to be left on the shelf when you go to reach for them. The ones that you and I are talking about today are all available if you're asking early. As life changes, there won't be more options. I don't see many new coming out there down the pipe, but just the way things work, the options become less the less time that you leave. So I thank you for your wisdom and for all the work that you're doing this to educate people, and I think the approach you take is just so helpful to people. So thank you very much.
You've had some fascinating guests, and I listened to every minute of those conversations, so I'm thrilled to be a part of what you're doing, Scott.
Wonderful. Till next time, thank you, sir.
All right.
Hope you enjoyed today's show. Great to have you part of our over 10,000 strong Healthspan community. Remember to subscribe if you'd like to learn about our upcoming shows. And as always, make sure you provide some feedback, whether that's a thumbs up or a comment, a question. They're all welcome. If you'd like to subscribe to our quarterly newsletter, you can do that at wealthspan.com. We're always looking for show ideas, or maybe you think you'd like to be a guest. Again, please reach out to book a motivational talk or inquire about our leadership workshops. Email me at info@wealthspan.com. Until next time, stay engaged, stay curious, take good care of you, those in your care.